All right, guys, this is Normal Central coming back at you on the YouTube video, and I really appreciate all the love and support so far. We are literally days away from Florida State kicking it off in Doak Campbell Stadium against New Mexico State on the great CW network at 7 o'clock Eastern Time. I know Florida State fans are great to hear and great to see the famous Cops 24/7 you might be seeing right before the game or whatever the case is. Maybe you're seeing Little House on the Prairie. I don't know. But I know one good thing is Florida State football is getting back. And I got my guy Nole Nation with me. He's been on with me a couple of videos now. Nole Nation, how you doing, man?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing great, man. I know you posted a lot of great things on your Instagram account. Florida State football is right around the corner. So every fan is super excited to hear about everything. Even if you despise Mike Norvell and you don't want him to be anywhere close to this program, guess what? You still care. We're 5-6 days away. Everyone is enjoying college football just being back. This is a sport that everybody loves. Everybody wants to see Florida State be successful, whether that's Mike Norvell in Tallahassee or without. You want to see Florida State do well. And obviously, you haven't had that production. There's a lot of different things that have gone on in this university that a lot of fans want to see change. You want to see do a little bit better. So obviously, the first line of business is Florida State fans thought that on a Monday that you would see projected depth charts. That's what we've seen in the past. We've seen it time and time again. They would release the projected depth charts around the morning time before the media conference comes out with Norvell, and you didn't see it this time. Norvell had actually addressed that. He had actually talked about how he is not going to have a projected depth chart this year. Made a couple fans kind of a little bit more hesitant, with everything going on. He did explain himself. He did say with the things that are going on in college football, the different sets, whether it be offensive or defensive, there's going to be more than one player playing that position at one time. So maybe, a Deuce Robinson comes in for a package, not even really saying Deuce, but let's just say, for example, a Javen Boggs. Javen Boggs comes in as a slot receiver. Then all of a sudden you see a Jason Lopez on the next play. Well, Jaden Boggs gets listed as a starter and Jason Lopez the backup, but what if Jason Lopez has more snaps than Jaden Boggs, depending on the game plan and the scheme and stuff like that? And I understand where Norvell is going with this. I know No Nation may have a little bit different opinion on that, but I think, with this, and I understand everyone has a feedback on how Mike Norvell is. You have this opinion on him. Winning 7 games in 2 years is not something fun. And as a wise man once said, winning cures everything. And if you're not winning, all these topics and everything come like heighten up here. If you didn't allow practice settings to media members, if you were winning all those games, guess what they would say to those media members? Those media members wouldn't care because you know what? We're winning games. But now, that Florida State has, allowed practices for a couple of times to the media members, then all of a sudden now they're not allowing them or they're kind of limiting them. Now fans are starting to kind of get irritated because they're like, well, you've only won 7 games in 2 years. What have you done on this and that? There's a lot of complaining that comes with the program, and I get it. There is a standard at Florida State. If you don't meet that standard, then obviously there's repercussions there. We're not Florida Atlantic. We're not Florida International. No offense to those schools, but you want to see Florida State be successful. And I think with the depth chart conversation, there's a lot of negativity surrounding the program. But let's find out what Nole Nation has to say, because I think he has a couple of key words there in this conversation.
Yeah. First of all, we're going to go. I know we're going to address this later on in the video, but Norvell comes out and says this is the best team. It looks like the best team since, in the last few years. Well, to me, if you're not releasing a depth chart, that kind of makes me wonder really how strong this team really is, not doubting any of the players. But if you're not going to release a depth chart, are we really as strong as you're proclaiming? Or is this going to be like another 2024 year? Because he said the exact same thing. Me and you were just talking about that before we got on the video, where he said that pretty much the exact same thing before that disastrous 2024 campaign. So that's just my thoughts on it.
Yeah, I just wonder too, because you look at it, the running back position, for example, like Chroma, he's probably going to be the bell cow starter, but he's not going to be a guy that's going to give you 90% of the carries. You have a guy like Sam Singleton's there, and he's going to have a lot of carries himself. You're going to have a guy, like a Trey Wisner, who, is available upcoming this upcoming season opener. And, Norvell talked about his importance to the team, and you can't escape, 1,600 yards in 2 years at Texas. I mean, he's got very good ball carrying vision, like you had talked about before in a previous video. But I just think it comes down to a point of like, you have these 3 running backs. You can't necessarily name one of those like an alpha starter when maybe Chroma gets 40% of the carries, Chroma gets 30, maybe Wisner gets 25. It's so close together. All those guys are going to play. It's the same thing with like Javen Boggs and Jason Lopez. What's the point in putting all these oars? And everyone talks about Mike Norvell and oars. And, why is he putting all these oars? But the fact of the matter is they're both playing. They're both going to be factors into the game. And I get it. Before we even get any further in this conversation, Mike Norvell is going to have to release a depth chart because the ACC requires him at the end of the week to release that depth chart for injury purposes and stuff like that. You can't have a competitive advantage that long. But I will say, like, think about this. You have an Andre Otto that you thought was pretty much a certified starter at left guard. Now you have Paul Bowling in the mix, and he's pushing for that competition. What would it say to you if they're still battling it out and you put an or designation? What does that tell to both of those players? I get it. Andre Otto has been hurt a little bit, and he's trying to pick himself back up and trying to finish strong throughout the rest of this preseason before you get to New Mexico State. But, how does that set a precedent for like this upcoming year? Even defense. We know Tony White as well as anybody else does his first year, what he does. He utilizes a lot of different guys, has 3 safeties. Sometimes he has 2 safeties. Sometimes he has 3 linebackers. Sometimes he has 2. How do you compute that on a depth chart, just defensively? Because he has so many guys that are out there. There's so many different schemes. You could have 20 different positions listed on a depth chart. Does anybody want to see a 2 deep full of depth chart? I don't know. I mean, it's a little bit easier offensively because you know what Norvell's ran, you know how he operates and everything. But in speaking of like Tony White's system, like with the jack position, for example, with Rylan Kennedy and Jalen Anderson, both of those guys are going to be utilized this year. But sometimes you might not need a jack. Sometimes you might not even use that jack at all. It just really depends on how you factor it in. Maybe it might be 3 defensive linemen and 3 linebackers, and you don't even use a jack. So it really comes down to a fact of like, okay, what's most important to you in this moment? And I think it's not a fact of you hiding a scheme from, and I know a lot of troll rival fan bases are going to say, oh, well, you're keeping everything from a 3-9 or 4-8 New Mexico State team. That's not really what it's all about. I think it's more so like you have a lot of guys that you're playing at one time. It's just a lot of different hesitancies, and like the defense is playing a lot of guys out there. It's not you're hurting people's feelings, but it's just like, okay, you have a lot of guys that you're playing at one time. You can't really go out there other than like an Ashton Daniels. You can only play one quarterback at one time, but like you can only play one kicker or one punter and stuff like that. But it's like, it doesn't really have to be this way. It doesn't have to be like the fan base going all up in arms about everything that's happening there. Because I can totally understand where he's coming from. But if he's so reliant on having this competitive advantage or whatever, I don't like that aspect of it.
Yeah, I was talking to a guy earlier today. You may even seen this, but he mentioned something that back to that 22 season, Sorry, when we played, what was it, Duquesne?
Yeah.
Where we before we played LSU. He had a kind of interesting thing with maybe you'll see Daniel or not Daniels, Marshall come out and play a little bit, and so he's not going to release his full, and he's not obviously not going to release the full playbook versus a New Mexico State.
Exactly.
You're going to be saving that for SMU and Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was kind of an interesting move. 'Cause I've never really thought of it like that, but it can definitely be something that works out like that.
Yeah, 1,000%. I think you're exactly right. I think sometimes when you look at how it factors into what Florida State brings to the table, you have a Kevin Sperry that you're probably still going to play a little bit this season. I know he's been a little bit more inconsistent, and Malachi Marshall's been a popular name, but you don't want to put that out there. You don't want to put who you're going to be able to kind of get there. You need, him to take second half reps, and you need probably both of them to take second half reps, really. You're hoping that Florida State can kind of dominate that game and kind of give more reps to everybody, so that way down the year you can actually have that guy ready for control. You can't have like a Kevin Sperry coming out against Stanford and game on the line, and you really don't know what happens. But yeah, it's going to be factoring in to see what you have. But I'm super excited to see what Florida State does with this depth chart because I know it can be really exciting for Florida State fans. And I know it's an exciting time for Florida State fans to talk about that, but I don't really think it's as big of a deal as you think it is.